So today I will be talking about some of the research that I've been doing, which predominantly focuses on Twitter trolling. In particular, I've been really interested in trying to identify the different communicative purposes and communicative styles that it can display, with the main hope that such information can help inform certain algorithms or classifiers which aim to detect it automatically online, as well as to produce some form of framework that law enforcement officials can use in a way to kind of determine whether or not to prosecute. So some form of help in a way. So then, what is trolling? Now I'm sure many of you have heard of examples, some of you have probably heard of it reported in the news, maybe even some of you have experienced it firsthand. But do we really know what trolling is? Or perhaps more importantly, do we know what is encapsulated in the term trolling? What kind of behaviours comprise it? Is it just one behaviour? Is it many behaviours? If it is many behaviours, are these very similar to one another, or are they completely different? Now, in my quest to kind of answer these questions, I stumbled upon an original definition of trolling, which meant the act of posting a message into a news group that was exaggerating something, with the hope that some new member or newbie would post a follow-up article which points out the mistake. Now, it would have to be a new member because experienced members within the group would know, essentially, that that person was just trolling. So in order to illustrate this definition, I've selected the king troll himself, Mr. President Donald Trump. Now, many of you will probably remember this very iconic moment where Donald Trump said that he was not a racist and was the least racist person. Now, if I intended to troll or be a troll, I would post something like this into a news group. Donald Trump is definitely not a racist. He is the least racist person. Now, the aim of doing so would be to provoke some new member, like this one, to post some follow-up articles like this, saying, that's a lie, look at this article, such as this one. And this illustrates exactly all of the times that Donald Trump has been a racist. And by doing so, I would then sit back and be highly entertained because that person had fallen for the bait and done it. So I've completed my task as the king troll. Now, despite this original definition, trolling has since been used to refer to a variety of different behaviours beyond its original sense. Now, these are just a few newspaper headlines, and here we have trolling referring to racist, sexist, homophobic, anti-Semitic behaviours. And so as a result, trolling has kind of become this umbrella term for so many different behaviours that really, depending on the context, trolling can mean anything from hate speech and malicious cyberbullying all the way to playful banter. Now, what this means is that trolling, actually, some kinds of trolling can be prosecuted under our Communications Act. Now, before I go into the details of what the Communications Acts are, I firstly want to say that here I'm using trolling in scare quotes for more ethical reasons because I really resent calling things like hate speech trolling under this guise called trolling. And I feel like we, as a society, we need to begin to start calling it out for what it is. Things like racism, let's call it racism. Let's not give it this blanket get out of jail free card term of trolling. But anyway, that's I've digressed. So, the Communications Act, it makes it an offence to send messages or other matter via a public electronic communications network which is grossly offensive or of an indecent, obscene or menacing character. Now, one individual who was prosecuted under this act, who was deemed a troll in the media, was Isobelle Clarke. Now, Isobelle Clarke sent messages deemed to be menacing by the judge to Caroline Criado Perez, who at the time was campaigning to put a female on the back of a banknote. Now, these are some of Isobelle Clarke's messages to Caroline. She said, "Die, you worthless piece of crap. Go kill yourself. I've only just got out of prison and would happily do more time to see you buried. I will find you and you don't want to know what I'll do when I do. You're pathetic, go kill yourself before I do. Or rape is the last of your worries. Rape, I do a lot worse things than rape you. Now, while these messages or tweets were prosecutable under our Communications Act, there's been other kinds of offensive tweets which have not been prosecuted. And one example of that is this particular case of Daniel Thomas and Tom Daley and Peter Waterfield. Now, in the 2012 Olympics, Tom Daley and Peter Waterfield competed in the 10-metre platform synchronised diving event, and they came fourth. And after coming fourth, this individual, Daniel Thomas, he posted the following tweet. He said, "If there is any consolation for finishing fourth, at least Daley and Waterfield can go and bum each other. Hashtag Team HIV." Now, the then Director of Public Prosecutions, who was Keir Starmer, he suggested that this was undeniably offensive, but it was not grossly offensive. And this led him to produce the following statement. He said, "The question for the Crown Prosecution Service is not whether it was offensive, but whether it was so grossly offensive that criminal charges should be brought. The distinction is an important one and not easily made. Context and circumstances are highly relevant. The right to freedom of expression includes the right to say things or express opinions that offend, shock, or disturb the state or any sector of the population." Now, in addition to making these statements, he also produced a set of guidelines for the Crown Prosecution to interpret this particular Communications Act. Now, what these statements, and as a linguist, these statements and these guidelines kind of led me to question, well, is it possible to distinguish trolling that is prosecutable from non-prosecutable trolling via the language patterns? And is there a way to measure gross offence via the language patterns? Now, whilst these are really interesting questions and I wanted to nosedive straight into them, I firstly also wanted to understand, well, what are the different communicative styles and purposes of trolling? What is encapsulated in this? What are the different behaviours? And how does trolling vary linguistically from one to the next? Now, in order to answer these questions, I firstly had to collect a data set of trolling. And I did this by defining trolling as those posts that have been labelled as trolling by other people. And the reason for this is because if I had collected trolling tweets when I first began my PhD, I had a very narrow view of what trolling is. But actually, with trolling varying so much, I need to accommodate for everybody's different perceptions of what trolling is. And so I define it this way, and I use this definition in order to identify instances of trolling. So in other words, if a post has been accused of trolling, then I take it to be such, and I would have collected that. So, for example, this particular interaction on Twitter, this person has said, "Oh, Larry is a troll, lol." And this is in reply to someone called Larry, and Larry said, "Who gives a shit? He lies every time he opens his mouth." So because this person has accused this person of being a troll, I would collect this tweet, and that's how I go about data collection. Now, using this method, I managed to collect 4,182 trolling tweets. And these are posted between November 2017 to February 2018. And the total corpus, or that's the collection, contains just over 100,000 words, with the average tweet length being about 24 words long. Now, in order to identify the different communicative purposes or communicative styles of Twitter trolling, I use a method called multidimensional analysis, which I have modified for the analysis of short text because the original doesn't analyse short text. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the detail of what the methodology is, but in order for you to understand how two texts can be stylistically similar or share the same communicative purpose, you need to understand the notion of linguistic co-occurrence. So, linguistic co-occurrence refers to the fact that sometimes, if you take two texts, sometimes they can have exactly the same frequencies of particular grammatical features. And the notion of linguistic co-occurrence suggests that this doesn't just happen randomly, but rather there's some underlying reason for these patterns co-occurring together. And that is a shared communicative purpose. And this is because previous research has shown that when two texts have a similar communicative purpose, so for example to persuade, if we took two persuasive texts and we analysed them for all the grammatical features that they contain, they would have similar frequencies of particular grammatical forms. And vice versa, so that if we analyse two texts and they had the same patterns of grammatical features, we can suggest, or we can note that they would share at least one communicative purpose. So, in order to kind of illustrate this, I'm going to pick one particular text type that I'm sure everyone here has written, which is the to-do list, okay? Everyone has written a to-do list here, yeah? Give me some nods. Cool. So, I just want you to think of a to-do list that you've written in the past. And we're going to talk about some grammatical features, and you can think about whether or not you've included those in them. So firstly, were there orders to yourself? Things like call Peter or John, or don't forget to do that thing that you were doing yesterday, but you didn't quite finish because you were watching those cat videos. Yeah, I know. So orders, yeah? What about mental verbs? So these refer to your thought or cognition. Things like forget, so don't forget to do something, remember to do something, or think about that thing that you were doing yesterday. What about nouns? These are naming things like bins, so don't forget to take the bins out. Bills, don't forget to pay your bills. Gym, don't forget to go to the gym, you lazy person. Or proper nouns. What about London? Things like, oh, don't forget to buy your train ticket to London. Or James, it's James's birthday, let's buy his birthday card. Now, chances are these particular features will occur quite often, these nouns and proper nouns, because to-do lists are informationally dense. They've got lots of information packed into them, and nouns and proper nouns carry the most referential content. So actually, we don't really need a whole sentence about having to take the bins out. We could just say bins and automatically be prompted that we need to take the bins out. So can we all agree that those features occur in our to-do list? Yeah? And the reason for that is because a to-do list has this underlying purpose of reminding us to do something or prompting us to do something, as well as to instruct us to do something. And so what this means is that actually, if we took other instructive texts, we would be able to identify, we would find similar frequencies of these particular features. So things like recipes, they're very instructive. So we can imagine that these features would tend to co-occur, perhaps not the mental verbs, but the others we could. So that's the notion of linguistic co-occurrence. And what the method does is it aims to identify in all of the texts the most common patterns of grammatical co-occurrence. And it does this by firstly analysing each text for the kinds of linguistic features that it contains. So say, for example, this is our collection. We would analyse all of the features. So we've got mentioning through the at symbol in these ones and these ones. We've got orders and imperatives, so like sit down or grow up, and then full stops and nouns, lady and honey. And on this side we've got demonstrative pronouns, this or that, which are those, and so on and so forth. And so once you've identified these features, you would then record it in a big table where each row represents that particular tweet or text, and then each cell reflects whether or not that feature was present, so P for present or A for absent. Then you subject this table to a statistical analysis, and the statistical analysis essentially reveals these dominant patterns of grammatical co-occurrence. It does all the hard work for you. And it puts it into these things called dimensions. Now, each dimension consists of features that are associated to the positive side, as well as features that are associated to the negative side. And what this means is that they're in complementary distribution, so that the positive side tends to mean the presence of one side tends to mean the absence of the other. So if you remember these tweets, we can safely say that if a message has an imperative or an order, so sit down or grow up, then it doesn't have a demonstrative pronoun. So that's what this means here. So it doesn't have a demonstrative pronoun if it has an imperative. So they're in opposites to each other. And so in addition to assigning each feature a positive or negative coordinate, the analysis also assigns each tweet a positive or negative coordinate, which essentially reveals the degree to which it is associated to the linguistic co-occurrence patterns. So when a text has a high positive coordinate, it means that it is strongly associated to these communicative that particular communicative linguistic co-occurrence patterns, and likewise on the negative side. And now, based on this assumption that linguistic co-occurrence tends to reveal a shared communicative purpose, we interpret the tweets and the features for the underlying communicative purpose. So, for example, we might suggest that these tweets on the top and these features have an instructive communicative purpose, so sit down, grow up. And then these ones on the negative side are non-instructive, because it's an opposition, and rather that they tend to encode an evaluation or a judgment. So this is gold, that's not right. So that's the methodology in a kind of brief way. And what I've done is I've applied that to the corpus of Twitter trolling tweets I've got. And I've interpreted the first 5 dimensions. Now, because of time, I'm only going to focus in on the last 2 dimensions. And I will briefly just go into that now. So I interpret dimension number 4 as reflecting the degree of expectation exhibited by a tweet, with tweets on the positive side tending to encode one's own expectations, what they expect to happen in the future, a prediction or anticipation. So this one says, the first one says, we're going undefeated, #BYU. Or the next one that says, I think it's mostly because females are so weak, so it feels as painful as a heart attack to them. For men, it would just be closer to stubbing a toe. Oh yeah. Or the next one that says, I don't know if I should be proud or disappointed that 5 people blocked me on my thread today. It would be great if people could refute things they had disagreement on with facts. It seems to be a high bar on Twitter. I appreciate Boxerworks' grace in recognising a Twitter amateur. Or the last one that says, I'm hoping 10 months from now, Trump will be #out of office, #impeach Trump. So whilst these are expectational, so they tend to encode what someone hopes or desires or expects to happen in the future, on the other side of the dimension, these are far less non-expectational. So as it opposite to what you expect to happen in the future, these express more doubt and uncertainty, not just more doubt. So the person is asking questions, and these questions kind of communicate doubt in that sense. So, for example, this one says, why can't you and all the pro-gunners just acknowledge the reality of your position? You don't care about people being gunned down in churches, schools and other public places. You think your personal freedom to have an AR-15 trumps the rights of the others to live. Be a man. Or the next one, hey bro, what voters were purged? Hillary's, Bernie's, Trump's, yours? Sit down, little man. Or the next one that says, wait, what? How did a Barbie doll trigger you all the way to accusations of opposition? So it's like kind of expressing doubt. There's no longer an expectation about what's going to happen in the future. These are non-expectational, and these are like, what? Like, what's going on? And kind of questioning that. So that's dimension number 4. Now, dimension number 5, I interpret as reflecting the degree of antagonism exhibited by a tweet, with tweets on the positive side tending to be far more antagonistic than those on the negative side. In particular, these antagonistic tweets they contain these kinds of adversarial questioning, so they're very aggressive kind of form of questioning that we've got going on here, and lots of abuse as well. So it says, do you know what a question mark is, stupid? How's this for a new tactic? You are a brainless Trump cult worshipper and your mama is a Bitcoin dumpster hoe. These people are so nice. Or the next one that says, so what should we do, Anna Kasparian? Start a war with the Philippines? This is your problem. Mind your fucking business. #TYT Live. Or the last one that says, that's why you're a single Trump supporter. And I'm not fake. My followers know what I really look like. Get it through your thick skull, because I'm only saying this once more. This is a Stan account. And I've got some more antagonistic ones because these always tend to be entertaining. Report what? You don't like it? Then leave Twitter. This is our place now. Go back to Facebook with the rest of your kind. Bye-bye. Or the next one that says, curious, Holly Mo, what's your favourite sidearm or rifle? Do you know much about the weapons you're called into control? Hashtag Second Amendment. Or the last one, I'm the bad guy. You know what, dude? You're what is wrong with this great country, the US of A. We, as in me and TJ, don't need any of you soft charming style baby shitwipes saying nasty comments. Thanks, but no thanks, Jay. You're a shitty photographer. Good luck. Now speak to the hand. So these are very antagonistic, right? They're targeted to that particular person and throwing abuse at them. Whereas on this side, the non-antagonistic side, these tweets do tend to contain criticisms, but these criticisms are not necessarily focused at the person that we're communicating with. They concern people external to the conversation. These tweets are far less aggressive in their style. They're a lot more deliberative. There's some form of rationality going on here, and they're a lot more calmer in their approach. So, for example, the first one says, on the contrary, apart from my school education, which totaled to around 2 lakh from kindergarten to intermediate, I didn't receive any money for undergraduate, around 1 crore paid by taxpayers. My postgraduate also will be paid by taxpayer, most probably around 2 crore rupees. Or the next one that says, we have no moral high ground here, and we miss an opportunity to have an important and necessary conversation. Instead, folks like you can feel vindicated for not liking those people because, well, they don't like us either. Or the last one that says, wealthy white Bernie supporters are obnoxious. Like Sarandon, they have other places to live and the means to do so. Unlike those of us stuck here under Trump, Hillary Rose Clinton voters would have voted Sanders. We were not shown the same solidarity. So there are criticisms here, but they're like focused on people external. It's not people here within the conversation. And some more ones, I just focus on the last one that says, or when it doesn't go so perfectly, homeschooling becomes the inbred among education options. Who can't count past 10 but has 16 fingers? Seriously, homeschooling is often used to keep kids in Bible study for 8 hours a day, once Ma realised she didn't know fractions. So these are the non-antagonistic ones. So they're my 2 dimensions. Some of you might have noticed these particular coordinate values on the side. And these are the coordinate values, and these reflect the degree to which it is associated to the particular communicative purpose. So I've really only been reading the ones that are most strongly associated to each communicative purpose. And because they're coordinates, it means we can plot them on a nice fancy graph, like this one. So each tweet is a particular dot, and on the x-axis we have, the horizontal one, we have the degree of expectation. So these are the expectational ones, what's going to happen in the future. These are the non-expectational ones on this side. And then antagonistic tweets are at the top, and non-antagonistic tweets are down below. And they're colour-coded, so the ones that I've been reading out to you are the ones that are in like the reddy orange. And now, because the coordinate values reflect the degree to which it is associated to that particular communicative purpose, I'm arguing that what this means is that there is possibility that we can begin to kind of quantify the particular communicative style exhibited in each tweet. And the way that we do that is by plotting each tweet's coordinate value on a histogram. And this reflects the distribution of the tweets with respect to this communicative style. And so in both of these, so this is the expectational one, this is the antagonistic one, what we can observe is a normal distribution, so where the majority of the tweets fall respectively in the middle, and only a small percentage of the tweets fall on either side of the dimension. So they're really strongly associated. And so what this means is that we can begin to make statements such as tweets with coordinate values above 0.4 are more antagonistic than 95% of the tweets within the corpus. Now, what this means is that this can be really actually very fruitful in a legal or forensic context. So we could have a new tweet, one that's perhaps suspect of being grossly offensive, and we could plot this on these graphs. And we can then say, oh, well, it's more antagonistic than this amount of tweets. So this would be really helpful in a legal context if you're trying to find ground for prosecution. And so I've kind of let on that this is what I aim to do. And so in order to kind of illustrate this, I've selected Isobelle Clarke's tweets, the ones that I read out initially, that were prosecuted, and I've run them through the statistical analysis, and I've obtained, and I've managed to plot her tweet. So this is the original plot. I've just now colour-coded it in red. And these are Isobelle Clarke's tweets. This is where they fall. So you've got some that are like quite on the periphery of the non-antagonistic style, and they fall here. But I don't expect you to be like a memory expert, so we'll go through each tweet on each histogram to make it easier for you to see. So this is, die you worthless piece of crap. So this particular tweet is not nice, but it's non-expectational. So it's not talking about what's going to happen in the future, what someone expects to happen. It's clearly just an instruction, like just die. It's a bit of abuse. But it's not really antagonistic nor non-antagonistic. It's quite in the middle. This is the same pattern can be observed here. Go kill yourself. Or moving on to this one. So this one says, I've only just got out of prison and would happily do more time to see you buried. Now, interestingly, this is very like non-antagonistic. But like when I'm reading that, I'm thinking, God, like that's a really mean tweet. Like that's out of order. But it's, if you think about it, it's not, if you remember those antagonistic style that I was reading to you, it was a lot of questioning, the adversarial questioning style. It was very targeted and very abusive to that particular person. Whereas this one is much more involved. It's a lot more deliberative and calmer in the way that it kind of, the tone that it evokes. So I've only just got out of prison. And it's like involved. It's all about her. It's all about Isobelle here. And then what's perhaps going to happen to Caroline. But we're not really sure. So yeah, that's why it's more of the non-antagonistic. This one that says, I will find you and you don't want to know what I'll do when I do, this is very expectational, but it's not really non-antagonistic or antagonistic. And this pattern can also be seen here with, you're pathetic, go kill yourself before I do. So this is quite expectational as well. Now, both of these tweets, I will find you and you don't want to know what I'll do when I do, and this, you're pathetic, go kill yourself before I do, both of these tweets are highly threatening, right? And threats, as we understand, well, as I understand them as a linguist, in order to make threats, you don't go and make threats now, but in order to make a successful threat, you have to communicate what you expect to happen as a consequence of that person not doing something. So you have an instruction, you want someone to do something, and you threaten them to do it, otherwise something else is going to happen to them in the future. So you need to communicate what you expect to happen to them. So these threatening tweets, both scoring quite strongly on this expectational style, supports what we understand threats to be. So this is quite interesting for if future... Isobelle Clarke's tweets were convicted for being menacing, and menacing kind of means to threaten. So this is really interesting with regards to threatening messages. If they're going to score strongly on this expectational style, perhaps we need to have a look at them a little bit further. Are they threats? Are they not? And finally, this tweet doesn't really score strongly on any of them. And this just means that perhaps that these particular communicative styles aren't covered what is encapsulated in this particular message. So then, to summarise, I have shown you how I go about trying to identify the different communicative styles in a corpus of Twitter trolling. I've managed to show you two of the main styles that I've interpreted, and then I've compared these particular two styles to Isobelle Clarke's tweets that have been prosecuted. Now, by doing so, I've revealed that actually those threatening tweets, explicitly threatening tweets of Isobelle Clarke's, were strongly associated to this expectational style, which is what we would expect with what we know about how to make threats. However, I've shown that not really any of Clarke's tweets, Isabelle's tweets, scored strongly on its antagonistic style, And this is because the antagonistic style that's represented within my collection of trolling tweets is comprised of this a lot more adversarial questioning style. It's a lot more questioning and aggression, whereas hers were not so aggressive in their style. And so I think that whilst I am suggesting that I can quantify a particular communicative style and compare new tweets, it's important to remember that by just introducing new tweets here, you've got to remember that these are going to be compared to what I've collected in my corpus, in my collection of trolling tweets. And so this then automatically leads to kind of questions of representativeness. Do the trolling tweets that I've collected represent the trolling population on Twitter? Are there perhaps some styles of Twitter trolling that are more represented within my collection of trolling tweets? And if there are, how do we even go about trying to test the representativeness of this? How can we measure whether or not this is so? Now, Whitney Phillips, she is, I'd highly recommend some of her reading if you're really interested in kind of the cultural perspective of Twitter trolling specifically, or not even just trolling as general. And she suggests that trolling is a subcultural phenomenon. And so actually, trolling continuously varies. It's going to vary with the times. And so does this mean that with my collection of trolling tweets, I mean, it will range from February up in November 2017 to February 2018, does that mean my trolling collection is already out of date? Does it mean that I have to maybe go back and keep collecting, continuously updating? And finally, I want to kind of open up the discussion as to whether or not you think that there is scope for this to be applied in the forensic context. Do you think that I can have a particular tweet that's contested as to whether or not it's offensive or grossly offensive, and if we plotted this on there, do you think that's going to show? And if so, do you think that there's kind of scope for my research to go forward and collect all of these tweets or messages that have been deemed grossly offensive and compare those to ones like the Peter Waterfield and Tom Daley one that was just deemed as just merely offensive? And if I compare those, can we try and identify perhaps distinctive language patterns between the two? And then maybe we should compare hate speech, because so much of trolling, the really bad stuff, or trolling, I should say, is hate speech. We want to identify where it overlaps as well. And so that's all I've got to say. Thank you very much, and I look forward to it.
Thank you. That was great. It's been very instructive and a very different approach than we usually have in the talk. So I'm going to ask a question, maybe just to clarify, kind of rehearse more quickly some of the method and some of the conclusions. Like, so when you end at the end of the analysis, when you go back to the Isobelle, what's her name, Isobelle Sawley tweets, which is just like horrible, clearly threatening, clearly offensive and scary if you're on the receiving end and you think this is a critical threat. But in the analysis, they look quite benign. Yeah. Right. So I'm kind of wondering what's going on in that. Is there an issue of context, because you need to be? I mean, if you look at each tweet on its own, in terms of the graph that you set up and the coordinates or dimensions that you have, it kind of falls somewhere in the. I was surprised they weren't like on the outer ring. Yeah. They were kind of more towards the middle, like the 0 point. So I'm wondering, like, why and how there's a discrepancy between what's an obviously threatening, intimidating, bullying kind of standard stuff that we associate with like extreme versions of trolling.
Yeah, well, I think that was like kind of my point with the representativeness, is that actually I'm not sure whether, like, a lot of Isobelle Sawley's tweets were clearly of their own unique style. And I think maybe if we go down and I interpret more dimensions, maybe I'll find that particular pattern. But they weren't necessarily represented within these dimensions that I firstly interpreted. So I think there is scope for, if I go further along the dimensions, perhaps I will identify what's Holy Grail. Yeah, right, I kind of feel like these particular styles that Isobelle was producing were more like less common. So I'm dealing with the most common patterns in the dimension. So the first dimension is the most distinguishing kind of pattern. The next one is the next distinguishing one. So that happens most frequently, and then slowly and surely you get slower down. So while I'm dealing with the most common patterns, I think I really should be also, especially with these really threatening ones, I should be looking down further down the dimensions as well.
But for me, that was quite an interesting result, because the expectation is like, if you're being trolled, or if you believe yourself to be abused on social media, the thing to do is, I mean, kind of just on a hearsay version or like a crappy version, when you encounter it, it's just like, I've been really antagonized by these awful things this person is being said.
Yeah.
And you show people and like, what is this about? And then like, this is a really antagonistic troll tweet or message or whatever. But you can effectively troll, and I don't know, trigger, or it wouldn't quite be antagonized, because like the analysis, like the linguistic analysis, shows it's not antagonistic, but you feel antagonized.
Yeah.
So there was something interesting in the way in which you can be threatening, extremely intimidating, without antagonizing someone.
Yeah.
Which I think is like a really perplexing result, but seems I'm not quite sure what to do. It also struck me like with the initial Trump quote, like, I'm the least racist person ever.
Yeah.
Just on its own, in terms of your analysis, it's just descriptive. There's no anticipation, and it's not antagonistic.
No.
It's almost the opposite of antagonistic.
Yeah.
But it's a deeply provocative citation.
Yeah,
So,
in a previous study that I've done, we had a collection of racist and sexist tweets, and we were looking at the different styles, and this kind of antagonistic style kind of came out as well again. But on the opposite side, it was far more conciliatory. It was like, this is our group, and we're going to like bitch about the others. And if you were one of those others that they were kind of othering, you would be so offended. It would, like, the things that they were saying was so rude, but it was about other people, and actually we're friends, and we're talking about this thing. So actually there's a solidarity there, and it was very conciliatory in the tone that was produced. So, I mean, but because it wasn't targeted at someone, it wasn't antagonistic.
but that's that. And just one more follow up, and then we'll go to the questions here. I mean, that's quite telling in terms of how people are defensive about their intimidating, threatening, trolling comments. So if you get accused of trolling, you can just say, well, I just said nothing antagonistic.
Yeah.
Right. So Trump just says, I just said I wasn't a racist. What's wrong? That's what everybody wants to hear.
It's
right?
a scapegoat.
So there's a way in which you can use defensive strategies to be offensive.
Yeah.
Right? So defense becomes the best form of offense. You just say, we're just talking. I mean, a lot of the tweets that you showed, which had quite high scores, are actually kind of self-defense. Like, I just want to do this. Like, the problem is with you. Like, you don't want us to have our freedoms or our guns, or you don't understand what it is to be against guns and so on.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of condemnation, but expressed through defensive language, and then that allows the person to kind of blame the one who's taking offence for them being offended by something that's apparently neutral. Is that?
Yeah, no, you're right.
That's really. I mean,
it's awful. It's a shame that that's the case.
It's very smart to do that, right? Because you can just be outrageous and just say didn't do anything, and do me. It's like the Brett Kavanaugh thing.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, sorry, that's kind of like going a bit astray. I mean, do you want to say more about the language patterns involved in those defensive structures, or just you haven't done the analysis yet?
No, I haven't done the analysis
Okay.
yet, but I'll go in there.
So I'm going to pass the mic around. There's a question there, and there's one there. Any more from that side of the room? Oh, there's two here as well. Okay, so.
I often find that the most damaging and, I guess, like terrifying and abusive examples of language online are more about subtext than text. So, is there, like, to what extent is subtext potentially measurable in linguistical analysis to sort of maybe aid the legal process, which is what you're...
Do you mean like the context?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess so.
So, I mean, we kind of go off a lot of language context can be reflected in the grammatical features anyway, but obviously, as I've shown you, like, so Isobelle Clarke's tweets were so small. It was like, die you worthless piece of crap. It was not enough of the instruction to kind of go off like what was the outsider context. Like, no one knew until I told you that Isobelle Clarke was convicted for targeting Caroline because she was campaigning to put a female on the back of a banknote. That kind of context isn't there unless I provide it for you. So there is a lot of it, yes, context is highly relevant. Sometimes it is reflected in the grammatical features, but sometimes it's not. And so context will play a huge part in the legal system. But if we can provide a framework that suggests, oh yeah, no, this is really antagonistic, more antagonistic than 4,183 tweets, then we've got something there, right? We can say that. So I think the method that I've done is kind of, it provides that way in, but then context will clearly play an important role as well. And also, in order for you to obtain offence in the first place, context is massively important. So the whole, if you went to the police because you felt that you were offended by a particular social media post, it's your subjective opinion, but that's context for you there. And so we're going off that context firstly, and then we need to work towards that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's.
So from my understanding, there seems to be like a lot of systems already in place for like security and whatnot that like watch what you're saying and like kind of like monitor what words are being said and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you have like any access to like any other kind of like databases like these like security kind of systems that happen, and like how, if they influence your research or if you don't, like.
So I've currently just gained access to a really nice data set of like the worst of the worst online harassment, and it's pure horrible texts that they've coded. They had like 30,000 messages, 30,000 tweets, and 5,000 are the worst of the worst, and the other 25,000 are like on the cusp of being this offensive. So I'm now going to like start plugging into that. But really, the police don't like to share a lot of data with you. You need to make really good contacts, and I'm on my way to building good contacts, but I haven't got those kinds of databases of hate just yet. Sometimes
databases of hate.
Databases of hate, yeah. If anyone knows any, send them along. Because I'll be more than happy to analyse them.
But can I just take the mic?
Yeah.
While the mic's going up, I think the question's over there. You said there's a question over there. It's going to take questions over here because the mic's here, and then we'll kind of go that way. You said at the very beginning that the kind of analysis you do could inform law enforcement, mm-hmm. but also the algorithms that kind of manage social media communications and so on. Usually, like everyone freaks out when everybody says control it, and an algo associated with social media, everyone's like freaking the fuck out because like that's meant to be scary stuff. But there seems to be something in the analysis you're providing which would, policing may not be the quite right term, but would at least segregate or channel some of these communications. I'm wondering kind of how you envisage that might work.
Well, at the moment we have this, I don't know if everyone is a Twitter user here, but there's this kind of filter on Twitter that's like sensitive. It says sensitive. This tweet contains sensitive content. So there's always that filter there, and so you can then choose whether or not you actually want to have a look at it. So that is already in place at the moment, but they tend to be trained. What my understanding of, they're trained on profanity. So any inclusion of a swear word or some form of there's like this bank of hate, like hate words and stuff like that online, and a lot of them are trained on that. So if a tweet contains any of those kinds of terms, then it's going to be under this guise of contains sensitive content. But really, like, I don't know about you, but I swear all the time, and sometimes it's like just amplification, like this is fucking great, like, and you just go into town. But if I'm going to use that, like, you're completely allowed to swear in that context, so it shouldn't actually be. I don't know whether it's sophisticated enough to kind of censor everything, or just censor the really, really like bad uses of profanity. So if my analysis looks more at the level above, which is grammar. And so that kind of hopefully will be more informative than the lexical realizations of the word uses of grammar.
Hi. I was just wondering, like, how important is it that the Isobelle tweets were like not just one tweet about kill yourself, but 5 or 6, or I don't know how many, because for me that seems the most important part about her being prosecuted for the fact that she tells someone to die or that she wants to kill someone.
Yeah, you're right. Like it was really repetitive. It was consistent. It wasn't just her as well. It was like another guy called John Nimmo, I think, and both of them were like really threatening. And I think there's a lot to say about this repetitive nature of it. But I mean, you could also just post one message that would be really long or contain lots of things, or just one that could, and that's it. One-time offence trolling can be hugely damaging. But I do think a lot to do with trolling, a lot to do with Isobelle. She had posted lots of messages. So I think you're right. It was this nature of her. It was just so in her face that Caroline actually did fear for her life.
Let's pass it. Oh, do you have a question? Sorry, did you have a question? No. Okay. So.
Hi. I was wondering if you'd heard of this multiplayer online children's game called Roblox. But anyway, on that there's certain algorithms that were put in place to stop people using hate speech within the game. But trolls on the game found ways of sort of subverting these and being able to say things. So, for instance, you couldn't say something like "go commit suicide," but people then started saying things like "go commit neck rope" or "go commit I'm not feeling so good."
Yeah.
So people just found ways
to kind of bypass it.
Algorithm. So I was going to say, especially online, with how language is kind of constantly evolving, if it's actually possible to kind of create an algorithm that can kind of keep up with the way that people are kind of subverting languages.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It actually reminds me of, I don't know if anyone remembers Operation Google, where like right-wing trolls managed to make the Google be synonymous with the N-word, and so that was like a huge thing. And so anytime anyone said it said Google, like it would come up with that. So that was awful. But yeah, I think I'm not really sure with language and because language is continuously evolving, it's hard, but we're dealing with like pure grammatical patterns here rather than language, like the words. So, for example, I was like the word wicked back in the day meant like terrible, but then at one point it meant like amazing, like wicked. But then also we have different adjectives for great or amazing and all those ones. But actually, when I'm just looking at an adjective, I'm looking at the pure grammatical pattern. So I'm not sure. I don't know whether my method would bypass that or not. I'm not sure. I'm no like computational linguist as much as I would like to be. But yeah, it's a really nice point. Thank you.
Two questions here.
Every time I think of the troll, I think more of the structures that generate trolls. So, like the sense of contemporary alienation and kind of the difficult socio-economical structures that are creating this kind of thirst for offence. And so I was wondering if those things are considered within your studies in any kind of way.
Yeah, so I kind of come from the cultural perspective that trolling is a social construct, and because trolling is inherently transgressive or deemed to be not normal, what actually trolling is telling us is that this is what society perceives to be not normal behaviour. So also on the flip side, by looking at trolling, we can work out what society actually perceives to be normal as well. I think like there is definitely scope to look further. I've not gone into that just yet about what is this telling us about society? What's this kind of reflecting, and how does this kind of structure of the world kind of make trolling happen? I think that's really a next step that I've got to follow up. Do you have any ideas?
Well, I mean, I don't have many ideas, but I like to think about, kind of cosmopolitan culture or cities creating a lot of a loss of community, and through that loss of community, a sense of loneliness, and through loneliness, despair, and within that despair, a sense of, anger, and through that anger, offence.
Yeah, so I think you're right in the sense of the community as well, because trolls come and they try and get into the community, and then they disrupt it, and they try and break it apart. They try and break apart normal communities. And I thought there's a part of it that actually, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, but that's like kind of jealous, right? These trolls are kind of depicted as these lonely type, on their own, maybe don't have any friends, and they're the ones that they see these communities of tight friendships, and they prey on that, and they want to break that up. So actually, try, if anyone's ever been trolled, like find grace that actually they're just jealous of you. They just want to come into your community. They're just loners, right? I know I'm not opening myself up to criticism from trolls.
So let me. There's a question here, but while you pass the mic, can I just follow up on that one before you ask? Just in relation to the comment you made a moment ago, that there is a form of non-aggressive or non-antagonistic trolling, which is very much about people saying that we're in a club together. We are a community.
Yeah.
So you can troll by methods of exclusion.
Yeah.
And the rest of it, which is a bit sort of like standard playground activity.
Yeah.
But what would interest me is the very fact of establishing a good communication over here and showing that we're mates and we can have nice times.
Yeah.
And then cutting somebody else out isn't just fear of missing out, but also, again, implicitly, not explicitly, a form of trolling somebody who's being left out of community. So it's not like the trolls are necessarily out of community trying to get in. Also communities like disparaging others who aren't in them.
Yeah, Whitney Phillips has a great quote, and I'm probably misquoting her, and Ryan Milner, and they both say that trolling is simultaneously inclusive and exclusive. So we've got this group, and also at the same time we're excluding all others and making sure that there's a distinction there. So it's completely two opposites, and each particular post can function in two different ways as well. So
So that's the question.
So I wondered, what sort of scope might there be for kind of analysing, rather than the linguistic structure of the posts themselves, but the responses to that post? Because obviously there would be a huge volume of them, especially the more inflammatory that original post is, and probably you might find a better pattern in the replies to that.
Yeah, no, you're right. Claire Hardacre, she's another expert on trolling, and she looks at the perceptions of people and the responses to trolling, how that is managed within a community. I think that there's definitely lots of scope for that. I've got millions of accusations of trolling that I can analyse.
Not against you.
No, I will do it.
No, but the accusations aren't against you as the...
Oh, no, not to me. Just because I collect trolling tweets through the perceptions of other people, I've got those. I've got these responses. And I actually was speaking to someone the other day, and they were saying, like, what do you kind of get this view of where these internet trolls, sometimes they provoke you to form, like, your worst self online in these responses. Sometimes someone said something like quite provocative, and then you erupt into this person that you would never do, and you're not that person. You really are aggressive, and you can be horrible online. And what does that say about you? And this is kind of what these right-wing trolls are doing. They're making left-wing people into these kind of trolls that's in a kind of way that it's more like a horseshoe. So there's no longer, I need two hands, I'm so gesticular. Like it's the right wing and the left wing.
No, left wing.
Oh, sorry, left wing and the right wing. And they used to be far apart, but actually they're coming closer together like a horseshoe, and it's these two extremes, and that's it. It's that defined by this extremism that then they're so close to one another nowadays that they're indistinguishable from their behaviours. And I mean, this is a really important thing where we need to kind of address how we're responding to trolls and how do we respond to trolls. And I don't think there's one particular way of doing it because trolling is so varied. But perhaps what we need to think about is how can we analyse our behaviour? Are we mirroring or maybe taking it a step further where we do become the troll as well? So we need to kind of take a step back and think, well, like, you have your fun, I'm going to sit here and be entertained that you're playing with yourself.
Just pass my
do you think you could use the same technique to use it to analyse the trolling tweets to work out if they're done by real people or not? Have you come across this? Like, have you found tweets in your selection that you consider might actually just not be? I mean, they're all real people, but like.
Yeah. So, do you mean like bots or or just like? Yeah. So.
Because that's kind of, that's like trolling commodified, you know, like bots essentially, you know, and I just wondered, like, do you think about that?
Yeah, like, I mean, especially I was collecting tweets, like, during this time, it's so many, like, of these kind of, this Russian troll identity, right, where people are, I mean, one of my dimensions I have interpreted further on, and one of them is like this whole persuasive dimension, and it's kind of trying to persuade you that this reality, this is what's happening in the world, and actually it's all just fake news. So this kind of idea, so we are getting these kind of bot kind of responses and messages within the collection of tweets. I mean, there are real people like that behind every troll. Whether or not they kind of function within this broader ideology of what a troll is or not, I don't know. I don't know how I can identify that. Only really through like the usernames and stuff.
The next question's down here. So can I just have the mic here?
Yeah.
It seems to me one of the things you were saying towards the beginning, especially in how you find tweets considered to be trolling, is by the response somebody gives to it. What seems to be coming out of your discussion is that trolling isn't just about the initial tweet, but the kind of circulation of activity around a set of tweets. So even if it's a bot or like Macedonian teenagers acting on behalf of Russians or whatever it is, it's not necessarily the case that those tweets themselves constitute trolling. But the entire kind of communicative backwards and forwards. So it's only a troll when it kind of takes off.
Yeah.
It's only trolling when it takes off. Is that fair?
Yeah. I think the success of trolling is definitely, well, they kind of are governed by this whole, I'm going to say my silly comment and watch the world erupt. And if the world doesn't erupt, then it's not a successful troll. And so it's not actually trolling because no one, and also if people haven't perceived it as trolling, then it's not trolling. So perhaps we need to change our mind as to what trolling is and what we want trolling to be and go that way.
This question.
Yeah, you may have covered this a wee bit in the last couple of questions, but I was just struck by, in the early part of the talk about the positive and negative attribution of tweets in a kind of technical sense of positive and negative, and I noticed that in the instructive tweets that it had these use of
honey and lady.
Yeah, but nouns to do with the body, sit down, grow up, things that were to do with action and embodiment, even if they were directive. Yeah. And I thought that meant a kind of, I might have observed that there was like a counterpoint with the evaluative ones, exercising a kind of sense of control through objective conceptualizing of a situation, and I wondered whether that might be itself kind of relate to this question of why trolling appears in the first place, to do with like normative values, just suggesting that normative values are encouraging people to treat the world in reality in a kind of in a conceptual overview, in a way that feels actually quite disempowering and disembodying, which then leads to this kind of eruption of a desire to have an aggressive communicative style, because it brings people back into a more immediate sense of themselves, and possibly also the other that they've stirred up. So in a sense, it's the superego and the id,
yeah.
You know, the trolling, and that's why I kind of wonder what the repercussions are of policing it and creating algorithms that try to control those processes, which might have like quite kind of natural human dynamics underneath it.
Yeah, I mean, your theorising of trolling is phenomenal. So, but yeah, I'm not calling to police it, and I'm not calling to control it either. I'm trying to understand it first of all, and then we can try and detect it automatically. I don't necessarily expect it to eradicate it or to try and censor it. I think Twitter will have to do what it needs to do in order to sort it out. Policing it is part of our law. It's part of our Communications Act, so that's not under my power. But yeah, like I think you are right in that there is something really interesting about trolling that is like reflects more about society as a whole that we need to certainly focus on. And you've got some really nice ideas, and I would like to steal your words. So thank you.
They're on tape, so you can do that. Okay, the next question is at the back, so I'm going to ask yet another question. So just can you put your hand up, Anton, please? Yeah, just there, Rachel. And it's partly how to respond to this phenomenon, which is kind of relatively new. I mean, something like this has been around, but the velocity at which it works, how effective it is, and it's the way that's constituted is very different than before social media. So I was wondering whether in your work or in people who are working around this from a linguistics angle, whether there's a sense of constructing typologies of what gets called trolling. Because you were saying at the beginning, like, you want to be very clear that trolling should be distinguished from hate speech, because trolling is like a get out of jail card.
Yeah.
But even within trolling, whether you can construct typologies with the view to finding ways of engaging with it which don't sort of continue to reproduce the problem if you don't want to. So it's not just typologies, but also like a help guide. If you find yourself provoked or triggered or whatever by somebody who's saying, well, I didn't say anything, I just said what I had to say. There's nothing antagonistic about it.
No, yeah.
You can still say, well, nonetheless, this comprises this type of trolling.
Yeah.
And the way we manage this to get out of going down that black hole would be these kinds of mechanisms.
Yeah, no, there's like network analysis and quite a lot of different methodologies that I could perhaps look at, especially with the responses to trolling, and perhaps map on responses to the actual trolling tweet, try and identify if there are patterns even with a particular style of trolling tweet. So say an antagonistic style always then demands even more antagonistic response that we've got as well, by like applying the same methods to the responses. We can map them on, and then we could say like, is this an effective style is this an effective response strategy as well? So we could look at that. I could definitely look at that.
All right. Okay, this question.
I was just wondering if perhaps trailing tweets could have a particular grammatical structure, but where the same structure could be found in tweets that were not trailing tweets, but perhaps where that structure was present, but also the action was destructive, where the adjective and the noun were derogatory. I just wondered whether something might come of a combination of those two sets of factors rather than just the grammatical aspect.
Yeah, so you're definitely right in suggesting that several of these styles are reflective in non-trolling tweets, but as a whole, what I've done for my PhD is I've tried to test this fact, and so what I've done is I've collected a whole collection of non-trolling tweets, so just like global Twitter. I've run the analysis on it. I've then compared global Twitter to trolling Twitter, and they are different. They're not. They do overlap, and that's no doubt that there is some overlap, but there is quite a substantial difference between trolling tweets, in particular communicative styles, with non-trolling tweets, which is a really interesting finding, which does suggest that perhaps through, if say this one individual, like, and this is where the repetitive thing comes along as well, that there's perhaps someone's tweets are being consistently moderated, someone's reporting these particular tweets as abusive. If they're always falling, or they've always contained these particular grammatical patterns that distinguishes it, perhaps we need to like further investigate here. Perhaps that's a user that needs to be banned, or that his content, his tweets need to be censored to an extent where it's like got that kind of these tweets contain sensitive content there. I think it's really hard though when it comes to doing such a thing. Like a lot of the time, tweets that might be have sensitive content in might be targeted to the particular individual anyway, so a person's going to see it no matter what, so I don't really know about that.
Okay, last question at the back.
Hi, thanks for that.
That's all right.
I was just wondering if you have had any experience of like dealing with trolling and mental unwellness, basically, because it sort of strikes me as like a lot of people that find themselves trolling are probably not that well. And how you go about that, you know, because it's not their fault, but then they're still sort of like ruining people's lives. So how do you deal with that in terms of like prosecuting, demonising, or helping and preventing?
Yeah, well.
Do you know what I mean? What's your experience of that?
One name that comes to mind, I think it is John Nimmo. He also sent messages to Caroline Criado Perez. I think it's John Nimmo. It was definitely another person. And he also has been he got 2 years in prison and had to pay a fine for sending these tweets. And then he's come out and he sent abusive messages again, and he also got sentenced again and got more. And like, what after going to prison, what makes you try and reoffend? And this time he did it even in a more like tactical way. He really tried to disguise himself through like, he attacked another Labour MP as well. And he ended up trying to like disguise his image and like online and sent like really anonymous emails, and it was really aggressive. So that kind of like what you're saying is like maybe there's something not right with these people. There's like definitely been a study before on trolling, and it was like a survey that they sent out to people who would be encouraged to troll, and they analysed them on different psychometrical tests, and they found, I think it was called the dark triad, which is like sadism, masochism, all like these like awful traits, psychological traits that trolls resonate with as well. So yes, I do think that there is, definitely.
Can you ban people? Like, how does that work? Can you actually?
What, you ban people from Twitter?
Yeah.
So your account gets suspended.
Right.
And I think initially you might get like a brief suspension, and then eventually like that you might be permanently banned. That email address, you're no longer allowed to create a new Twitter account under that email address.
But then there's like people can just create multiple.
I know, yeah.
In the bar. Around people being banned, the most recent famous case is Alex Jones from Infowars, was mentioned last week. And he's been trolling the parents of the kids who were killed in the Newtown shooting about 2012, I think it was. And he's been going on for years. This is a government hoax and a stage and that. So they've been complaining quite regularly, amongst many other things. But just kind of to pick up the last two questions to put them together as a final question, it seems to me that as opposed to the kind of sense in which trolling is a kind of exceptional activity, it strikes me that trolling is actually extremely common. It's like one of the norms of social media use, but it's not just a norm because people mean to troll, but it becomes a norm because people feel that they're trolled and get trolled. So partly to come back to the question earlier, it might be that some forms of language use, which are not antagonistic, not deliberately aggressive and so on, end up falling into sort of like, as with the histograms you were showing, like this is non-antagonistic speech,
Yeah.
but it's definitely trolling.
Yeah.
Right? So it might be that people are producing tweets or whatever, social media communication, which are non-antagonistic, but end up being trolling and then totally mortified or upset that they're being perceived as trolls when they're not meaning to be trolls, and that backwards and forwards happens. So there's something about the structures of communication and the norms that get produced by trolling, which then sort of change the entire communicative framework, right? So things end up seeming like trolling, I don't know what to call them, setups.
Yeah.
Right? Trolling configurations, even if they weren't initially.
Yeah.
And it's just a shit show.
Yeah.
At that point.
Or as Whitney Phillips called it, trollish fuckery.
Trollish fuckery.
Yeah.
You need to say that to the mic.
Yeah, so Whitney Phillips calls it trollish fuckery, which is a really nice kind of statement, and she makes sure that it's in every paper of her. So if you ever want to see the word trollish fuckery, read her papers. She's got a blog too.
Yeah, she's
I'm promoting her.
I think she's recognised as the person who's done the most sort of serious cultural analysis around this, which should kind of be supported by the work here. So her book, I think, is called "This Is Why Things Can't Be Nice."
Yeah, this is why people can't have nice things.
Oh, this is why people can't have nice things, which seems a very good description of the internet. All right, so Isabelle's got to get back to Birmingham tonight. Let's finish and let's thank Isobelle for really.
Thank you.